Thank you so much for watching this video today. It can be scary and stressful to think about a diagnosis for your child, especially when there is so much confusing and misleading information about autism out there. We hope that sharing information about autism spectrum disorder will help make your journey easier and more successful. In this program, we will share information about autism spectrum disorder, including how a diagnosis is made and what signs you might see in your own child. We will be mostly sharing information, but we will also ask you to think about some questions as we go.
My son, Christopher, is 14 and 6'8", so you can imagine what that looks like. My favorite thing to do with him is to go shopping. He likes to shop in the grocery stores, at Target, at Walmart, and I think he likes it because it gives him a sense of independency to be able to shop and put in there what he wants and what have you. And also he was diagnosed with autism at 2.5. So that was the beginning of our journey with him.
Cameron is Cameron, a wonderful, beautiful, bright individual who has so much potential. I don't want someone to just say autism and that's it. There's so much more behind a child. They just need support. And when I think about it, we all have special needs. Some people, don't want to be touched. Some people, need a lot of hugs. Some people maybe don't socialize. Maybe they're more introverted. Some are more extroverted, but we all have special needs. And so I try to kind of think of it like that. We all need something. We all are just trying to get our needs met in a way that's appropriate. So helping my son navigate this world, and as adults, it's confusing for us. We're just trying to navigate it. So it can be scary, as with any big life experience, graduating high school, getting your driving permit, getting married, maybe someone passing away. All of that's scary, but you don't let it define you, and you work through it, and you have to accept your new normal for whatever that is for you. Did I like the diagnosis? No. Are we coping? Yeah. There's help. It's not always easy, but life never is.
Well, I have 5 kids, and the second to the youngest was diagnosed with autism. Since he was my 4th, I just noticed little quirks before 6 months. He would make eye contact, but it just didn't seem like he was maybe understanding. He would give a blank stare, and it was hard for me to convince everyone else, because when they would see him, they would just be playing and saying, well, he's making eye contact. That's number one thing that they say, the myths about autism. And so I just noticed things at an early age, but it was convincing everyone else, like the doctors, because they were saying, well, he doesn't fit the normal standards for it. And I said, well, every kid is different. So it was a long journey since 6 months, and he's 5 years old now.
We know you are here because you want what is best for your child. We hope that all the information shared throughout the program will eventually help you and your child reach the goals that are important to you and your family.
When I got the diagnosis, I cried. I was in shock. I wanted him to be normal. I wanted him to fit in. All those hopes and dreams and aspirations and goals we have for our kids. But that's what I found, how I reacted when and all my thoughts and feelings when I found out that he was on the spectrum.
I think when it first hits you, you grieve. And the first thing I would say, don't stay in that grievement. Because the longer you stay in that grievement, the longer it takes for you to get out and fight for what your child needs. And I really mean it's a fight. Because you're in denial. So my initial thing is, I'd say whatever that takes. If that means you're going to cry for 2 or 3 days, or whatever it is, and get up the next morning whenever you're done, and stand and figure out what it is, what this word that is kind of taken into your life, which is autism, what does that mean? And how does that mean for your child? Because it doesn't define them, he or she. It just means that there's a little different, and their life's going to be a little different. And I'd also say that it doesn't mean that your goals have to be shattered. It's just going to take you a little longer to get there.
My hopes and dreams kind of were crushed in the beginning, because I got the realization that yeah, when you thought he had autism, yeah, he really does have autism, but as time is catching up to me, I'm maturing on the idea. It's getting easier for me to say, well, you know what, he can do that. It's just going to be a little more challenging. He's going to do that. He can play sports. We just have to work a little harder with him. So now my hopes and dreams for him have changed from when he was first diagnosed, because when he was first diagnosed, I thought he's never going to live on his own. He's never going to be able to go to college, never this and that. So things have changed now with time. You just need time to digest and think about that it's not the end of the world.
Let's think for a minute about what those goals might be. What are your hopes and dreams for your child? You can pause the presentation if you would like to take notes as you think about these hopes and dreams. Now that you have thought about your hopes and dreams for your child, keep these in mind as we move forward. Let's talk about what autism is and what signs you might be seeing in your child. We will use the term ASD, which is short for Autism Spectrum Disorder. This is the official medical term for autism. It reflects that there is a true spectrum of symptoms, meaning that every child with ASD can look very different. ASD is a developmental disability. This means that we usually start to see signs in early development within the first few years of a child's life. Some parents become concerned when their child is a baby, and others may not notice differences until the child is older. We do not know for sure what causes autism. Most experts believe that it is likely a combination of genetics, or how we are born, and environment.
I had never heard of autism. Didn't know what it was. From 0 to 5, my son, I always said was the perfect child. No terrible 2s or terrible 3s for me, just perfect, easy to watch, easygoing, social, fun to be around, just my kind of guy. He was my ride or die. I didn't have any idea. And then again, also, when you're given a diagnosis, there's different stages in the grief process. Sometimes, even now, I'm like, oh, why can't you be normal, you know? Remembering, okay, he's 10, but in certain areas, he's not able to do things he should be able to do given the disorder.
There are some disorders that are easy to identify with a medical test. In autism, it is not that simple. Research suggests that there are many biological causes that may be involved in the development of autism, so we cannot do a single test to identify autism yet. Instead, we have to rely on behavioral characteristics, meaning we look at how a child acts and interacts to see if they fit the criteria for ASD.
When we went to the doctors and I didn't feel like they were listening, it was uncomfortable. I mean, I spent hours there looking in their eyes saying, how can you tell me that my son is doing this and I'm not seeing that? You know, he wasn't typical developing and I already knew that. And for them to tell me, well, he's just a little delayed. And I said, no, because if you look on the milestones, he's like where a newborn is and he's almost a year old. He was not sitting up yet. He wasn't even trying to stand, nothing. You would put him in the middle of the floor and he wouldn't move for hours.
One thing we do know, parent behavior cannot cause autism. Children do not develop autism because of what they eat, how much their parents talk to them, because they got shots, or because they weren't around other children when they were younger. About 1 in 68 children is diagnosed with ASD. ASD occurs in children all around the world from all racial and ethnic groups. It is about 4 to 5 times more common in boys than it is in girls. There are 2 main symptom areas in ASD. The first is differences in social communication and interaction. The second is restricted or repetitive interests or behaviors. You can see that there are individual symptoms within each of these broad areas. We will talk about these in more detail, but I just want to point out something first. Any one of these symptoms could be related to lots of different disorders. For example, if you have trouble making friends, it could be because you have autism, but it also could be because you have ADHD or anxiety or a language delay. For this reason, it is necessary that a child shows a specific pattern of symptoms to qualify for an ASD diagnosis. This means showing all 3 social interaction symptoms and at least 2 out of 4 behavioral symptoms. We're going to break this down by symptom area now. The first main area is differences in social communication and interaction. The first is difficulty with social emotional reciprocity. This is the idea that social interactions involve a back and forth with another person, and that back and forth is something that is often hard for kids with autism. There are different ways that this might show up in your child. Here are some common examples of differences in social interactions. The first is reduced sharing of interests. If you've spent time around young children, you've probably noticed that they get excited about things, and they often want other people to be excited too. For example, if they get a new toy, they might show it to everyone, often over and over and over, until you say, "Oh, wow, cool." Kids also share interests by pointing out or talking about things that they think are interesting. They might also share accomplishments that they are proud of, like showing mom a test with a good grade or pulling dad over to see a tower that they built. Children with ASD often do not share interests with others, or they do it much less often than other children their age. They can be excited or happy to do things on their own, but they may not always involve others in this excitement. You might notice that your child is happy to keep busy on his or her own without the need for attention from others. The second is difficulties with conversation. Successful conversations involve a back and forth between two speakers, like when you are talking with someone about a movie you saw and they ask you questions or tell you what they thought about the movie. Children with ASD can struggle with this, and conversations with them can seem very one-sided. Some kids may answer questions but not add anything to the conversation. Others might talk for a long time about something they are interested in, but don't let the other person say much. Of course, we don't expect very young kids to have full conversations, but even young children do some turn-taking while talking with others. For instance, if you're looking at a book and say, "I see a cat," kids are likely to say something back, such as, "I see a dog." This is something we do not see as much in children with ASD. The third is difficulties with shared emotion or empathy. Children with ASD often struggle to understand and respond to others' emotions. In typical development, young children often get excited when others are happy or concerned when others are upset. Children with ASD may act differently when others are upset. They may not notice, they might get upset, or they might not know what to do. The second set of behaviors are about nonverbal communication. Young children quickly learn to use nonverbal communication strategies, such as looking at you when you talk to them, pointing, nodding, and using facial expressions to let you know how they are feeling. These usually emerge early on to help the child communicate with others before they can talk. In autism, nonverbal communication is often limited or absent. Eye contact is one area. Some children with ASD may not look others in the face or avoid eye contact when people try to look at them. Others may make eye contact, but only very briefly. Others might use eye contact, but only as a last resort. For example, you might notice your child is more likely to look at you when he or she really wants something. A second area is facial expressions. In typical development, you can usually tell how a child is feeling from their face. After just a couple of months, they tend to show the basics, like happy, sad, angry, and then over time they can show more facial expressions, such as guilty, surprised, or amused. Some children with autism might look neutral or flat most of the time. Others show emotional extremes, such as happy or angry, but not many other expressions. Others still might show facial expressions that don't quite match the situation, such as laughing when others are upset. A third area is gestures. We use all kinds of gestures to communicate, such as waving, gesturing for "come here," putting our finger to our lips for "shh," and nodding or shaking our heads. Children with ASD may not use gestures at all, or they may only use ones that they have been specifically taught. Others may use a smaller number of gestures than other children their age. The third area is friendships and play, which focuses on interactions with other children and creative or pretend play. For friendships, we expect very young children to start showing interest in other children by watching them, playing next to them, or starting some kind of interaction, like saying something or sharing a toy. Children with ASD may not show much interest at all in peers their age, or they might avoid them. You might notice this in daycare or school, where the child with ASD is playing alone and separate from the group of other children. Other children with ASD may show some interest in other children by watching them, but they do not go out of their way to approach them. When children get a little bit older, they start to like certain kids over others and will develop friendships. Children with autism can struggle with different parts of friendship. They may have trouble joining in or following rules in group games. They may have a hard time following the lead of another child in play and only want to do things their own way. Other children with ASD may say they have friends, but don't show much give and take in those relationships, such as sharing interests with that person. Children with ASD often struggle with creative or pretend play. This might include things like imagining an object as something else, like pretending that a block is a train or pretending to eat fake food. You have probably noticed how children usually create stories while playing with toys, such as narrating a race among their cars, setting up a pretend fight with action figures, or making a tea party with dolls. Children with ASD may not invent these kinds of creative stories while playing, and they may have trouble following another person's lead in play scenarios. Think for a minute about what signs of social communication differences you have noticed in your child. As you come up with examples, remember how different autism can look from child to child. This is important to keep in mind, that no two children with ASD necessarily look alike. Your child probably won't have difficulty in all these areas and may do some of the things that we talked about. The second main area of symptoms is restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. Young children may have many different behaviors that are hard to understand, but these are the ones that we look for with autism spectrum disorder. The first is repetitive behaviors. You might have noticed repetitive behaviors in your child, which can take different forms. This generally means that they do something over and over. Some children have repetitive movements of their hand or body, such as flapping their hands or rocking while moving their arms in certain ways. Other children may play with objects or toys in repetitive ways. Examples might include spinning something over and over, repetitively opening and closing cabinet doors, or repeatedly tapping surfaces. These are just a few examples, but any type of ongoing repetitive behavior that is hard for your child to stop would fit under this symptom area. We also think about repetitive speech, such as kids who immediately repeat what someone else has said, or kids who repeat things that they have heard others say, such as saying lines from television or movies. The second symptom is rigidity or resistance to change. Many children with ASD get overly focused on routines or certain rituals. They may insist on doing things in certain ways or orders, such as touching the wall in special places before leaving the room, or insisting on closing every door in the house. Children with autism might get very upset if you tried to change up their schedule or routines, such as when parents drive home a different way or if there is a new person in the classroom. These routines and rituals don't always have to make sense to other people. Many parents of children with autism describe that their children have specific ideas in their head about how things should go, and they get upset if things don't go their way. The third symptom is unusually intense interests or preoccupations. Children with ASD can also become very focused on unusual or intense interests. Examples of unusual interests include things like bus schedules, microwaves, or street signs. Some interests, like dinosaurs, Star Wars, or planets, may be appropriate for the child's age, but they are unusual in their intensity. The child may know many more details and facts about the topic than other children their age and talk about the topic over and over again. Or he or she may insist on finding an object of interest, such as running into the kitchen every time they enter a house to look at the microwave. You can see how these interests may get in the way of having appropriate social interactions with children and adults. The last area is sensory-related behaviors. Sensory behaviors can be either sensory-seeking or sensory-avoidant. Sensory-seeking behaviors include looking for some kind of specific sensory input, such as repeatedly smelling, rubbing, or peering at objects. Sensory-avoidant behaviors are when the children get distressed in response to certain sensations. Some kids get very upset about loud noises, or specific noises, such as the vacuum or a baby crying. Other children may be overly sensitive to certain textures, smells, or bright lights. In addition, some children with ASD seem surprisingly tolerant to pain and temperatures, like extreme hot or cold. Many of the behaviors we just described can happen during typical child development. What sets them apart in ASD is that they tend to be more severe, and they cause some kind of interruption for the child or family. Many families tell us that these types of behaviors can get in the way of their child following directions, being able to make it through important family routines, or interact socially with others. What repetitive behaviors or interests have you noticed in your child? Again, how repetitive behaviors show up is very different from child to child. Just to highlight, many children may show one or more of these symptoms on their own. It is when we put the whole pattern of symptoms together that we can be confident in a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And it is also important to remember that high-quality services can help these symptoms improve over time. Like we said earlier, there is a lot of information floating around about autism, and hearing different information can make it difficult for parents and other family members. You might have heard some of these myths before. It is not true that children with autism are not loving and affectionate. Many children have very strong attachments to their parents and other family members. They may still seek out hugs, affection, and comfort from their family just like any other child.
He would make eye contact, but it just didn't seem like he was maybe understanding. He would give a blank stare. And it was hard for me to convince everyone else because when they would see him, they would just be playing and saying, well, he's making eye contact. That's number one thing that they say, the myths about autism. And so I just noticed things at an early age, but it was convincing everyone else, like the doctors, because they were saying, well, he doesn't fit the normal standards for it. And I said, well, every kid is different. So it was a long journey since 6 months, and he's 5 years old now.
It is not true that children with autism do not feel emotions. Many children with ASD feel emotions quite strongly, sometimes even more than other children.
My child, Cameron, he's 10, he is very imaginative. He reminds me how resilient we should be, how positive. He skips to the car in the morning, and I'm like, if you can go through everything that you're going through and still skip to the car, why can't I? And so he just encourages me in that way to always be positive. And he'll say, Mommy, my room is a place of happiness. So he kind of will check me, and basically if I'm not happy, don't come into his room, and to just, try to think of the positive and be strength-based. So that's what I'm most proud of Cameron for, that he can be resilient and that he can be positive. And it just helps me to endure and keep that hope.
It is not true that all children with autism have special or extraordinary skills. Because of characters on TV and in the movies like Rain Man and Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, people often expect that all people with autism have special skills. In fact, extraordinary skills are not more common in ASD than in the general population. However, children with ASD certainly can show strengths in some areas, and it is always important to think about a child's interests and strengths when designing a treatment program. If you still have questions about ASD or how that fits for your child, we recommend talking with your child's doctor or teacher. They are used to parents bringing in questions about diagnoses, and this can be an ongoing conversation if needed.
My greatest strength is knowledge, because I truly believe that knowledge is power. If you would ask me that after he was diagnosed, I would say my greatest strength is to pray through my situation, because it was hard. It was challenging, it was painful, it was grieving, and that strength was to be able to continue to stand each morning and to deal with whatever that obstacle that came across in my life. That was my greatest strength that made me stronger. So as I stand today and my son is 14, the knowledge through those years has just made me stronger as a parent to advocate for him and others.
Thank you for listening today. Before we close, we'd like to come back to the point about your child's strengths. It will be so important for you and for those working with your child to appreciate his or her full picture, including areas of need and those things that he or she does well. We will end today by asking you to think about something that you see as a strength for your child.
I love to daydream with him. We lay down and look at the clouds when it's a sunny day, and that's our bonding time.
Keep these strengths in mind as you and your child move forward on your journey.